This is my third such nomination after Justice Gorsuch and Justice Kavanaugh, and it is a very proud moment indeed. Over the past week, our nation has mourned the loss of a true American legend. Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg was a legal giant and a pioneer for women. Her extraordinary life and legacy will inspire Americans for generations to come. Now we gather in the Rose Garden to continue our never-ending task of ensuring equal justice and preserving the impartial rule of law. Today it is my honor to nominate one of our nation's most brilliant and gifted legal minds to the Supreme Court. She is a woman of unparalleled achievement, towering intellect, sterling credentials, and unyielding loyalty to the Constitution, Judge Amy Coney Barrett.
And just like that, Trump nominates Amy Coney Barrett to the Supreme Court. Third pick. Merrick Garland was supposed to be the pick instead of Gorsuch. Trump has Kavanaugh, Gorsuch, and now, most likely, Amy Coney Barrett. What are Democrats going to do to stop it? Answer is nothing, because there is nothing they can do, basically. Yeah, you can come up with tricks and everything else, but at the end of the day, that woman is going to be on the Supreme Court for a very, very, very long time. Even if Ro Khanna and some of the Democrats are able to kind of go after the court, she is going to be on there for a monstrously long time. Donald Trump, 3 court picks. Now, the interesting part is, what does this mean? And what has Democrats, libs, after they wipe their tears away, been saying about it? One, everything that you hold dear at this point is at risk. On the second point, Democrats say it is entirely and completely the fault of Jill Stein and Susan Sarandon. Those two are entirely responsible for this. They're not. Trump has all the power in the world to do exactly what Trump did because he's the president. The Senate have all the power in the world to do what they're going to do, meaning confirm her, because they're the Senate. The Constitution says all of these things are legal powers. Democrats have been screaming coup as if there's some kind of weird thing where the president apparently doesn't have power to put their pick in. And at this point is flip it out. You should be flipping out. But you should have thought about that before being so lazy and incompetent and so too cool for school that you didn't do due diligence to get Merrick Garland in. That would have been one pick that you would have had. And you were also too rigid, too believing in this notion that the public job is to get you in office, as opposed to actually dealing with real material concerns that would galvanize the public to you so you can win. Meaning, on the first point, this is not a coup. Just because Lindsey Graham last time around said, well, I mean, we shouldn't do this unless, in an election year and blah, blah, blah. Well, that was always a stunt. That was always just looking for a reason in order to not give Obama his pick and come up with some kind of justification that the public will be okay with, or at the very least give benefit of the doubt to strong arm that pick away from Obama. And again, Obama didn't do due diligence. He didn't take necessarily Herculean effort to try to get his guy in. But, it's too late for crying over spilled milk now. From the standpoint of policy, and policy that is going to find its way back to the Supreme Court, it will do so with the watchful eye of 3 people put there by one Donald Trump. Let's talk about what this means, and let's also drill home the point that the reason this is happening, it's not because of Jill Stein, and not because of Susan Sarandon, it's not because of Comey, it's not because of any of that stuff, other than the Democratic Party lost, and didn't want to deal with the fact that they lost. And whether that loss goes into this notion of, we don't want to support policy. I mean, Clinton ran with a certain arrogant disdain for the process, as if the government and the public owed her the presidency. The public did not owe her anything, certainly not the presidency. You could galvanize the public by backing policy that the public loves. That's one way to try to get elected. Or you can do a race to the bottom, where you run a helter-skelter campaign where you focus entirely on the other person, making your entire central thesis to your presidency, I'm not Trump. And she lost on that. Now, Joe Biden is about to do the same thing. My point to Democrats is that you should be attacking, vilifying, and going after Joe Biden to get him to come to the table for Medicare for all. The reason why I say that is if you want to get your candidate elected, if you want to be sure that that person has a better chance of winning, you do things to galvanize people to your cause. The overwhelming majority of the people that don't vote, disproportionately, blacks, Hispanics, the poor. Now, if you think about it, these are Democratic constituencies. These Democratic constituencies stopped engaging in the political process because they realized that what they wanted was not necessarily coming back to them in regards to policy. And that it seemed like, inexorably, regardless of who they voted for, the tax cuts still go in. Right now, they're talking about Trump and his taxes. Trump got, $72 million windfall? And that windfall was basically provided by one Barack Obama? Because Obama passed 83% of Bush tax cuts. So, it's both. 300, I think they said over 350 million. I think it was 380 something, but 350 million more than that. Each year is just from the wealth vanishing. People hiding their wealth so they don't have to tax it. And so things like education and all that stuff should be funded anyway. But when they say, how do you pay for it? Investing more money into the investigative functions of the IRS would provide you the money to pay for it. Don't cry over spilled milk. Don't call it a coup. Don't call it none of that stuff. This heinous woman is going to sit on the Supreme Court. And the only group, people, party responsible, Hillary Clinton, Tom Perez, Obama, and the other Democrats that basically refuse to deal with the needs of the public. Or for that matter, take on political campaigns to energize the public, to galvanize the public, and bring them to your cause in order to get something accomplished. That's not why they want office. And so that's not what they do. And so it becomes a referendum on Trump, not an aspirational politics in the midst of a pandemic and a bunch of other crises. No. Referendum on Trump. Well, in 2016, that referendum failed. And beyond that referendum failing, at the end of the day, the powers of the presidency allows him to choose Barrett. And, oh my God, be afraid. Be very, very afraid. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, please like, share, and subscribe. You can always support this content through PayPal or Patreon. I know you guys haven't been seeing me all that often. Don't abandon me yet. These last few weeks have been rough. And so I'm trying to get back up to normal in regards to getting the videos out and everything else. But nevertheless, it's an adjustment period. Let's call it that. But let's talk about Trump and the Supreme Court pick. Democrats are howling. We must stop him. Now, for Brett Kavanaugh, they pull all the stops, even calling a man a rapist. But what do you do for Amy? How do you stop her? Now, there are quorum issues and stuff like that you might be able to play around with, but at the end of the day, you don't stop her. She's going to be on the court. You try, of course, but she will be put on the court. What does this mean? Trump, out of 9 justices, would have 3. And if this case, meaning our election, ends up in the court, which it very well could because of the ballots and how that stuff is going in the mail, and there's going to be lawyers on both sides checking and inspecting, and inevitably, it will end up in the courts. Maybe, I think, anyway, it could. When it ends up in the courts, 3 of those justices will be pro-Trump because Trump put them in office. Now, I don't know what the case will be. I don't know how the case will be cut. I know for the George Bush case, that case was mind-blowing and set a precedent all on its own. Meaning, The Supreme Court can give the presidency away to Trump if it goes to the Supreme Court and you have a conservative Supreme Court. And many of the conservatives are people that Trump was put on. Trump and that Supreme Court could review the same case of the election. Now, the problem is if you end up with 4 justices, you may end up with a 4-4 split, which, what happens? Beyond that point, if she takes her seat, and if this election goes to the Supreme Court, she will be ruling on it. And Trump could be your president for the next 4 years from a Supreme Court that he basically loaded. I don't mean loaded in a bad sense. I just mean he did his job politically. Your job as a politician, aside from getting elected, is ideally, in this kind of philosophical schoolboy way, to get things accomplished. You get things accomplished by galvanizing people to your cause, having political pressure, having leverage, and all that other good stuff. You tend to use that, ideally, again, to tell people, this is what I want to do in government. And you go out and you figure out how to get those things accomplished using the leverage that you have at your disposal and the argument that you have at your disposal. McConnell and Republicans used an argument that basically said we shouldn't choose a Supreme Court pick in an election year. McConnell, this year, let's get this thing done. It's his job. It's his job. I hope you realize that. You may demonize him for it. I don't necessarily like my political leaders being duplicitous and lying and all this other stuff. But the moment that McConnell did that, you should have known that if the roles were reversed, McConnell would take the opposite position because that's the way these guys do. But it's his power to do this. So he's going to do it. Elections, 1. Roe v. Wade, 2. Obamacare, because if you remember, Obamacare is now in the courts. And if she's sitting on the courts, they can put a knife in Obamacare. And not just speculation. I mean, Donald Trump has been tweeting about this. Like, in the midst of this, look at this. He put himself basically saying, right here, Obamacare will be replaced by a much better and far cheaper alternative if it is terminated in the Supreme Court will be a big win for the United States. Any case that has the potential to go to trial at this very moment will be going under justices that are very favorable to Trump. Now, Democrats are trying to combat this by going after the Supreme Court. So instead of packing the court, their thought is to put term limits on the justices. So it would add an 18-year term limit to the Supreme Court justices. The bill, titled Supreme Court Term Limits Act, is sponsored by Democrats Rokana Joe Kennedy III, that's the one that just got beat by Markey, and Don Breyer, will provide for the Supreme Court nominations in the first and third year after the election. Now, this bill has no chance because Republicans aren't going to do it. Does that mean that they wouldn't do it if they win? Meaning if the Democratic Party wins the election, that they wouldn't necessarily put term limits on the Supreme Court? I got to be honest, I don't entirely buy it. Maybe, should they, if it was me in a political contest, I would do it because you have to do it. If your objective is to get things accomplished, well, you have to do things that allow you to get those things accomplished. One of those things would have been to put a lock on that court, meaning to put political influence on that court in the sense of getting that court term limits or making them run for elections. Whatever you need to do something to mitigate that court being a thorn in your side for getting policy accomplished. But again, Democrats aren't necessarily getting that much accomplished. But just be aware, this could take place if they take office and they take power. If Joe Biden wins, he's most likely going to win the Senate also. I have a hard time believing that Joe Biden wins the election but loses the Senate or is not able to retain or not able to take the Senate. If he's able to take it, he would have the House, he would have the Senate, and the presidency. And they could pass this, and it would be perfectly legal to do so in order to go after and attack the Supreme Court. The 18-year limit seems extreme, but either way, it's just an idea. On the other side of this, the Democrats have been howling, coup. It's not a coup. The president is well within his discretion to choose a Supreme Court pick. You can blame Ruth Bader Ginsburg for dying, or you can blame yourself. Right now, in this election, Joe Biden, in the middle of multiple crises that the country faces, is telling people to go vote for Trump. He's basically so confident and so arrogant, in the same way that Hillary Clinton was, that he would tell people, go vote for the other guy. If a person is saying, I want Medicare for all, and it has 88% support among Democrats, and a Democrat is saying, we're not going to support it, what does any notion of democratic or democracy mean? What does any notion of representative government means when you're in a pandemic and the public has to actually make an active demand for Medicare for all in healthcare? Millions of people infected with the virus. And you have, 200,000 people dead? And this is something that I have to even argue? It is the responsibility of Democrats, if they indeed want to win, to push Joe Biden, along with the other lefties outside the party that keep saying, represent our interests and you get our votes. If Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, and Joe Biden are coming out saying, we don't really care, people are going to vote for us because they're terrified of Trump. And that's their political strategy. That's what they're running with. My point is, in real world, real terms, making an argument that it is the responsibility of the candidate to get your vote makes more sense. If you are a lefty, if you're some of these people outside of the political space, you stand under the banner of policy and you make the argument, you get our vote if you represent our interests, and represent our interests is taking this policy. That's not a litmus test. If anything, the litmus test is on the Democratic side that does not want to accept the policy with 88% support. I mean, you're in the gross minority here. And you're telling me that that's that we're the purists. We're not the purists. We are making an argument that in the midst of a pandemic with millions of people that are infected with the virus, hundreds of thousands that are dead, 300,000 expected to be that at Christmas, and untold numbers affected by Christmas. Medicare for all is off the table. And the only thing Biden is going to do is incrementalism on Obamacare. That's assuming that Obamacare still exists, if indeed Joe Biden even gets elected. Medicare for all has 88% support and 70% support outside in the public in the midst of a pandemic. The Democratic Party put out a healthcare plan that potentially is going to be struck down by the Supreme Court, as opposed to taking the perfect legal option of Medicare for all. Isn't that wild? Stop crying. Stop crying. Obama didn't push for Merrick Garland. Too cool for school, loses that pick. Clinton didn't care about pushing for policy that would have galvanized the population to her cause and everything else. Again, she looked at the public as if the public owed her the White House. And even Joe Biden, who would tell people in a heartbeat, go vote for the other guy, that he would veto Medicare for all if it passed the House and the Senate, which would have been a momentous occasion in and of itself, but he would veto that policy in the midst of a pandemic. And the policy priorities of the American public, be it expansion of Social Security, the elimination of student debt, those things off the table, the legalization of marijuana off the table, despite the fact that the majority of the public goes for those things. I'm making the point that the reason you often fail in politics is because you're not going for candidates with the notion of represent my interests and get my vote. You're pushing for candidates in the sense of I'm terrified of the other guy, so you're going to get my vote regardless. I'm making the point that the latter, you're going to get my vote regardless, is the thing that allows you to, A, be taken advantage of, to incentivize the party to take advantage of you, make it irrational to take advantage of you, make it criminally, politically negligent to not take advantage of you in that situation, whether you're blacks or Hispanics or, for that matter, lefties. What you should have done. This is like Carter G. Woodson, lead a man to the back door, and after a while the man will get used to it, and if the door is not there, he would seek the door out. This is kind of lefties. They sought out the door of failure in 2020. You can even make a case in 2016 they did the same thing. What you should have did was stand under the banner of policy when Bernie Sanders failed and walk out and say, en masse, all 30 million of the people who want Medicare for all of the 30 million people that don't have health care and want Medicare for all, every last one of them should have raised their hand and say, get our vote when you represent our interests. That means, in the midst of a pandemic, you need to be supporting this policy. Drop, walk out, and the next person does the same thing. And you do that for every last 30 million person to get across that you are going to lose if you pursue this direction. What you've issued is a demand. Think of all the lefty groups. You have TUIT, CEDAR, all of these groups, DOOR and whatnot. All of these people, en masse, the Yellow Vest Movement, the Sunrise Movement, every last one of them en masse should have stood up and say, you represent our vote when you get our interests. You will lose this election if you are not backing Medicare for all and a Green New Deal or elimination of student debt. Pick two, pick three as a tip of the spear. Set your demand. Setting your demand at the very least allows you to be part of the conversation as opposed to the face down, ass up, Cenk Uygur approach to politics. I'm making the point that with all of those people, you'd have been able to, for the first time and for God knows how long, set a demand in regards to what you want, what you believe that your country needs, and do so fervently and loudly with the idea and understanding that accountability means he could lose and be willing for that. It is our interest, it is our argument that it is the responsibility of the candidate to get your vote, not to give it away. And just because one of your candidates who you're backing lost in an election or primary process, that has nothing to do with you fighting for the interests of those policies. Those things are separate and distinct. Yes, you might have failed in the political space, but your strength was never in the political space because they hated you remorselessly. Your power was in the tens of millions of people that backed you and those policies. And because for this year, first time, you find out they're popular. Not just popular, I could go through them. Look at this. 72% want to expand Social Security, 69% want Medicare for all, 67% a $15 minimum wage, 67% want to legalize marijuana, 64% want to tax extreme wealth, 63% want a Green New Deal, 58% want a cancellation of student debt. That's the entirety of the population, not just Democrats. Meaning, the left or the center of the country is that. The two parties are way out the fucking reservation and are basically scamming the American audience. As lefties, it was your responsibility to hold the line on the policies that you held dear, as opposed to feeding into cowardice that has now allowed us to be dealing with a maniac. I hope you understand what I mean. In this very specific situation, you know in 2020 that the policies you were pushing for were not popular, not just in the Democratic Party, but entirety of the country. And your issue is, how do you get it passed? How do you get it passed within the context of a party that is not for those things, and actively so, regardless of what they may say out of their mouth? The only way for you to get that passed is not through party politics, but outside party politics, and with a certain spitefulness in regards to represent America's interests or lose. The demand that you're setting here is a first. Defund the police is a demand, but it's also a demand to say you will lose if you don't back our interests. Here's the catch. It's not so much that you want Trump to win. It's more so that you are forcing a demand in the sense that, are you going to represent us, or are you going to take it to a maniac? You said Donald Trump was the end of all things. You said he was a fascist. You said he was going to end democracy in America. Great. Are you going to tank it to that man instead of accepting a policy with 88% support? That is the only thing that lefties should have been saying from the moment that Sanders got into that race to the moment that Sanders lost. Are you really going to tank it? As opposed to appropriate policy that has 88% support, or 72% support, or 66% support, or whatever the number of support is. And what does it mean if they do? If the Democrats hear your demand, is understood perfectly clear that 30, 40 million people are not going to vote for them, and they still push on, what does that mean? What does it mean for democracy? What does it mean for representative government? What does it mean for the people that found themselves to be Democrats? What does it mean? And I am very curious about whether many Democrats believe that that's probably what would happen. That demand would go out and the party would still tank it because it doesn't necessarily want to deal with the reality of a public that gets energized and that gets vocal. You're supposed to be the battered wife, not the uppity one. So yeah, I'm going to burn the house down and kill everybody in the house if I need to do that just to prove a point. Keep in mind, they are not hurt by this. Nancy Pelosi is going to keep her $100 million, and everybody else in Congress that's rich is going to stay rich. They may dislike it, they may boo-hoo it, but at the end of the day, those things hurt us, not them. And they're more apt to do those things that hurt us if it becomes a question of whether or not that us is trying to take some level of power. That's one of the things you have to accept in my perspective of things. There is no magical door. We've basically given a free pass with no accountability for the last 20, 30, 40 years. And just like any other room that you leave messy for all of that time, cleanup is a bit of a bitch. And in this case, cleanup is breaking the model that allows cowardice to win. It is our job, our responsibility, whether you're black, white, gay, straight, trans, whatever, to hold political leaders accountable, and in holding them accountable, to have some level of wherever you fall in the political spectrum, influence in your political space. You don't want a Frankenstein monster gallivanting around the world, beating up other nations, nor do you want your population raped viciously by the oligarchs of the country. It is our responsibility to stop that, especially, I put more so on the left, because the left is the party, or the left is the section that, and when I say that, I mean philosophically so, that's the part that is the conscience of the nation. That is the part that looks at the poverty, looks at all of the people who can't make ends meet, and see 42% of the population making $18,000 a year. That's a hellish life. But the catch is the left perpetuates that hellish life because it goes along with the Democratic Party as opposed to holding that particular party accountable, being a thing unto itself, and being willing to say, you represent our interests and you get our vote, and have that as a constant. I don't care if Satan is on the other side of the line. That has nothing to do with you and this particular party representing my interests. He, Satan, may be representing the interests of another constituency in the other party. I don't have to like it. The question is the Democratic Party representative of its base, or representative in general of the population? And if it is not representative of the nation, I think that's important to know. Even more important than who wins or who loses. Because whoever wins or loses, you weren't in a representative government anyway. It was all a facade. Especially if the political space basically says, no, we're going to tank it as opposed to dealing with the public interest. It's his pick. I don't have to like it. Don't have to love it. By the same token, it is his pick. And in the same way that I would say Merrick Garland was Obama's pick and he should have pushed that pick through, I say the same about this. And they will. And the question really does become, from the standpoint of the Democrats, what do they do to try to mitigate it? If anything, I mean, at this point, they're basically Republicans. They're courting Republicans. What does the left do, who stays in the Democratic Party, as that same Democratic Party has Republicans trotting across stage and taking swipes at the left? What does that demoralize, weak section, the political equivalent of the abused spouse, what do they do in this process? Because many of the policies that are going to be struck down are those. Yeah, I'll leave it here. I just wanted to make the point that this is not a coup. Trump has the power to do this. It's his job to do this. Congress is going to do this. And all of these arguments about coup and what happened in 2016 and all of it doesn't matter one iota. What does matter is what she rules on when those things come up, and whether or not she is a lock in those votes for either Roe v. Wade, for either killing Obamacare, or for that matter, even giving Trump the election. Buckle up. Buckle up. It is going to be a hell of a ride. Let's see. I'm going to end this here, but understand all of the consternation and everything else coming from Democrats, and they're being freaked out and all. You should have thought about that before cheating Sanders. You should have thought about that for choosing a candidate as flawed as Hillary Clinton. And this year, it doesn't seem like they're making any other difference because they don't seem to care that the country is on fire. And in not caring, and in taking that as almost an afterthought, the campaign is basically around Trump. It's not around policy, it's basically around Trump. And you think to yourself, wait a minute, the country's on fire. There are floods on one side, fires on the other side. There are 30 million people out of a job. There are 30, 40 million people without health care in the middle of a pandemic with 200,000 people dead. And they give a beauty pageant where Republicans are stepping on stage, whereas policy for something like that. How do you deal with that? It's the operative and the only question that really should be asked and answered at this point. And yet, you get spectacle. Triumph of spectacle over actual real things to deal with the real material concerns of the population. And it is to the detriment of all of us that that's just so happened to be true. Xavier Foster, Biden voters hate Trump, yet they want Assange free. Biden voters want Assange free? Biden voters hate Trump, but they want Assange free. I wasn't aware that Biden voters wanted Assange free. From my understanding, Biden voters are just Clinton voters. And those Clinton voters look at Assange as being the person who was working with the Russians. And so my understanding wasn't that Biden voters were okay with Assange. I could be wrong. Hope your recovery is going well. We need your voice to be loud and clear. No, represent my interests, get my vote, or either damn right you will lose. What? I don't understand how politics can be anything else. Think of what I'm saying for the moment. You go out and you say your society needs X, Y, Z. There are other people who agree with you. There are other people who don't. A politician pops up because you need some kind of rule set that people can rely on and agree to and crew around that you think is relatively fair for you to give voice, opinion, and to even run for office if you wanted to. You decide to run for office, or your politicians decide to run for office. Now, how does he get elected? Ideally, under normal circumstances, in a rational society, the people would vote on the candidate depending upon the interests that the candidate represented. Not a bullshit interest, real interest. And the candidate would say, okay, we're in a pandemic. I'm going to represent Medicare for all. The other guy say, I don't believe in Medicare for all. I believe in something else. And they fight over it, and the public chooses. But that's not our elections. You have 100 and something million people that don't vote. And of the people that do vote, it's in these kind of weird party lines of sorts. And they don't vote aspirationally. It's not, we're in the middle of a pandemic, we need healthcare. It's, we're in the middle of a pandemic, all of these people dead, we got to get rid of Trump. Missing the point that who are you replacing Trump with? And don't you want more, expect more from your political leaders who are supposed to be dealing with your material concerns, and they don't. They're representing somebody, it's just not you. Why would you vote for that person? Now, I understand people say Trump, but understand what I'm saying. If you had 20, 30 million people that said, I'm done, and walk, you can't win without us. Now, the left love unions, love them to death. But if you notice, unions always have to take risks when those unions go on strike. They don't want to kill the company, but they do want to put damage to the company to have some level of leverage to make your pain that you feel for being exploited their pain. If you sit in the corner by yourself, nobody's going to know and nobody's going to care. Hence, strike. Make it hurt. We're going to make you lose money in the same way you're exploiting us. They're hurt by that action. Nevertheless, the company is also hurt. The issue and the point that I'm trying to make here is how does the left love strikes, and yet battered wives of the Democratic Party have no compunction of saying, I'm done. It's astonishing to me. It's like, yeah, you do that. But it's the same principle. You've wedded yourself to an institution to which you've just become an appendage, where your input and everything else is not really cared about. So much so, they go give Republicans. Because you've wed yourself so much to that institution, because they don't necessarily care about your interests, and even though your interests diverge in many of these points, because the interests diverge in many of these points, you get this, I'm sorry, I was reading something at the exact same time I started talking. Look, my basic point is this. It is bizarre. It's an inversion of politics to make an argument that you're supposed to throw yourself to a candidate that don't represent your interests. In this very specific election season, with it known, just taking one policy, but I can take multiples, the Medicare for all has that level of support, and for them to throw it to the side, it is anti-politics to be okay with that. If your job is to get a policy accomplished, you're looking for any leverage that you have at your disposal. You can't punch, kick, or do anything like that. What you can do is threaten what they need, which is their vote totals, so you can get in office. You have nothing else. Your leverage lies there. And yet, that's the one bit of leverage that the left is so terrified of using that the Democratic Party was very capable of using and willing to use in 2020. Go back and look at the debates. In one of the debates, they asked Chuck Todd, will you give it over to Sanders if he wins it? Meaning if he doesn't get all of the votes necessary, however, he has more votes than anyone else, would you give it over to him? None of them said yes. Everybody said No, we wouldn't give him anything. We'd fight to the last tooth and nail. We'd rip it out of his hands. Each and every one of them knows that if they did that, they would lose. Didn't matter. It was more important to stop Sanders as opposed to getting in office. Biden was the thing that could stop Sanders because he could sop up the black vote. And getting him in office was a secondary concern. Yeah. It's a playbook. It's not a great one, but it is one that works. It is a rock, not one that's great, but again, it's effective in its own way. Your job, your objective, your only objective is policy. It's not getting any random Democrat elected or anything else. Your objective, as militant as people leading the civil rights movement and as narrow-minded focus on it, is getting policy accomplished. If they're willing to help with that aim, great. If they're not, too bad. Your thing is there will be accountability in the political process from here on out. You get our vote when you represent our interests. Votes are supposed to be transactional in this way. And in all honesty, when Democrats are going after lefties, what they're missing is lefties are basically saying, we want Medicare for all for the betterment of society. Your party has basically made a choice to focus on its constituents that gives them millions of dollars. $1 billion for the election. And then turn to look at you and say, hey, why aren't you voting for this guy? Well, that guy's functioning for his constituents. I just so happen to not be one of them. He's representing their interests. They wouldn't be giving them gobs of money if he wasn't. I'm saying that if there's a choice, and if your job is to try to get that person, political leader, who's getting $1 billion to run in an election, to pay attention to you, maybe you don't have $1 billion. But what you do have is the ability to say, despite the billion, you will lose. I hope you understand what I mean. This is the year that the left had the opportunity to rise up and stand under this notion of policy because it knew that its policies were popular. Whether that was with Sanders, without Sanders, that should have happened. You should have had tens of millions of people to extricate themselves from the party and say, no more, I'm done. Done. No mas. Done. This is what we need. Represent it or get the fuck out. And stay there. I mean, I got to be honest, I'm fascinated by the question because I don't necessarily know what the party would do. They may very well take it. But yeah, I'm fascinated by the question, and people don't like to answer that. Let's see. What up, homie? Alexandro. What's up, Alexandro? All right, guys, this video has gone monstrously long. So I'm going to end this here. I'm going to say like, I'm going to say share, and I'm going to say subscribe. Yep, JT is pretty basic. Garno, good to catch you, Garno. Yo, it's pretty basic. Learn to walk away. Quit letting yourself get roped into. Get roped in back because you have an emotional statement. Candidates, representatives. Yeah, it's like people, look at these guys like they know them. You don't know them, and oftentimes these guys are working for their constituencies, which is not you. They scam you for votes, yes. But if you ever want to get anything accomplished, the pathway is the door. If you don't have $1 billion to put into a campaign, what you do have is your body. You do have the ability to organize. And you do have the ability to use leverage in the very specific way that it needs to be used in regards to trying to pressure a candidate to do X or Y. But you can't do that within the context of the party. And for all of these black people who are saying voting is power, shut up. It's not. It's the opposite. Your pathway is not giving up your random vote for some random Democrat. Your pathway to power really is saying, we want this, and you will lose without it. And having a black constituency that's made up so much in the Democratic Party, like voting to the tune of 90%. Why do you think they take you for advantage? Why do you think they take advantage of you? Why do you think that you wring your hands so often and say, oh, I feel like they're taking advantage of me? Why do you think that Clyburn throwing out Kamala Harris and said, those black folks can now shut up about this stuff about being taken advantage of because we gave you Kamala Harris? Token, theater. Kamala Harris is just Obama. Obama gave 95% of the wealth or income to the top 1%. Income gains to the top 1%. So his blackness didn't stop her from doing that. So why would her blackness stop her from doing that other atrocious stuff too? They use identity in lieu of issues of class. And they've been using that as a way, as a fig leaf of sorts, as opposed to doing real material things that benefited your community. I mean, for fuck's sake, Obama did Herculean effort to protect Wall Street. Didn't do that to protect black homeowners, homeowners in general, but African Americans, a lot of their wealth is basically held in their homes. So when it went belly up, and when the Obama administration didn't seem to care all that much when it went belly up, he damn sure didn't use that Herculean effort like he did for the TPP or trying to get that over. After that wall collapsed, those people lost their homes. They lost a huge amount of their wealth. And so, I look at this stuff and you say to yourself, if you really want to get something accomplished, what leverage do you have at your disposal? And I'm sorry, those progressive Democrats, quote unquote, the political equivalent of the abused spouse that find themselves in the party, you have no leverage. You have zero. You don't matter. You're a non-factor. Yes, they need your vote, but your vote is already a given. You have no power because basically you are already a canned response. We get into a negotiation, people shut, lock, bar, nail the door shut, and say, okay, we're going to come to a deal, regardless of what happens. All right, we're going to privatize Social Security to something else. Oh, you run a hard deal, but okay. You've already barred the door. Meaning, whether you're talking about all of these other lefties and everything else, they were already a canned response. There was nothing in them over the last 40, 50 years that would have had the ability to say, yeah, I'm done, and walk. Even this year. Even though this year was the year that it should have happened. You won the policy arguments. What the fuck else do you need? Walk. Like, share, and of course, subscribe.